Now this behavioral finance, as I told you that this is a new area and people are taking interest over this behavioral finance. But the first question is that if we have to know about any subject, the first and obvious question that comes into our mind is what exactly is behavioral finance? What is behavioral finance? What this subject is all about? We already have studied financial management or finance or this finance and that finance, but what exactly is the behavioral finance? So the behavioral finance, as the word itself is coming, that it is at the core there has to be finance. Finance will be there in the core, and we know that every organization have a behavior. We have studied, being a student of management, we have studied organization behavior. And if an organization have a behavior and there are certain functional areas in the organization, functional department in an organization like marketing department, production department, finance department, HR department, accounting department. So if an organization could have a behavior, then why it's one of the department cannot have its behavior? Finance can also have its behavior. That is the crux of studying behavioral finance, that finance can also have its behavior. So when we used to utter the word finance, so those who have studied about finance, or those who have studied or have some interest at the UG level or PG level also, some interest about the finance, they must be knowing that finance basically have three important functions. That is the financing decision. And like those who are not familiar with the discipline called finance, let me explain to them, like just in one line, like what is financing decision. Financing decision is all those it is related to all those decisions that is related to arranging finance. I need money to invest, I need money to expand, I need money to establish a business, I need money to start some new activity, and for that I have to arrange for the finance. And what may be the sources of finance? It may be my own money, I may get it borrowed from bank, I may get it borrowed from some other financial institutions, maybe from the market. So from where I will be arranging that money, that is exactly financing decision. Another decision is investing decision. Once the money is arranged, money is raised, then that money has to be invested somewhere. And like those, for the beginner, just let me clarify that investing is not that you are only investing in bank fixed deposit, or you are investing in stocks or bonds, or you are investing in some securities. Investment in building is also one kind of investment. So if you have started some business and you are trying to invest and you are buying some building, you are buying some machinery, plant, so that is also one kind of investment. Investment in building, investment in plant, investment in machinery, investment in stock, then obviously investment in some that government security or the bonds and stocks, that will be there. But investing is a very broad concept. So once the money is arranged, that has to be invested. And the third decision is the dividend decision. The money, the profit which has been made by the company, that has to be distributed to the shareholders. So that is the dividend decision, and that is a very critical decision. Many times the finance manager have to make a decision whether I need to retain that money, that cash, or should I disburse that cash in the form of dividend to the shareholders. And because whether it will be retained or it will be disbursed to the shareholders, it will have a long-term implications. So in financing decision, as I told you that what will be the financing decision, what should be the debt equity ratio, whether we should go for more borrowing money from the market, or we should go for raising capital from equity. That is a very important decision. In investing decision, should we go for buy or we should go for lease? Suppose we require one machine. So there are two ways of acquiring that machine. We can buy that machine, or we can hire that machine, or we can take that machine on lease also. Dividend decision, whether we should pay dividend or we should reinvest the profit. And all this decision, financing decision, investing decision, dividend decision, they have certain behavioral characteristics. And what will be that behavioral characteristics? For example, whether we should be going for borrowing or we should be going for raising money through equity, or we should have our own capital. That depends on the philosophy of the person who is sitting in the helm of affairs. Whether he likes borrowed money or he likes to have his own capital, that actually decides whether that person will be going for the borrowing or that person will be going for the equity. Like those who have studied finance, you must be knowing that if there are borrowed money in your balance sheet, in your capital structure, that will give an extra leverage. But in spite of that, there are many companies who do not want to have borrowed capital. For example, recently you must have heard a news about Reliance, that Reliance is fully debt-free company. So Reliance is fully debt-free company. This is one perspective. But whether it is good for the company or bad for the company, again, from the perspective of finance manager or from the perspective of a finance analyst, that will be different, because if you have some portion of borrowed capital in your capital structure, that will give you extra leverage, financial leverage. But in spite of, do you think that Mukesh Ambani was not aware about the concept of financial leverage? Definitely Mukesh Ambani was aware about the concept of financial leverage, but still he has gone for having his company 100% debt-free company. Why? Because actually it may be because of his personality, because of his philosophy, that we should not go for the borrowed capital. Similarly, should we go for buy or lease? Now, just think about your own self, or like the people who are around you. There are many people who would like to stay in a rented house, and there are many people who would like to have their own house. Now, the theory says something different. From the perspective of data, if you just go on calculating the cost benefit of staying in your own house or staying in a rented house, the data may be speaking something different. But you will find that there is a clear-cut preference among some people for having their own house, in spite of whatever the cost associated with that. And there are some clear-cut preference among some people to have their house on lease. So is the case with the car. Like many people, they don't want to buy a car and they prefer to use this Ola or Uber and instead of buying a car. That actually is also, that depends upon their philosophy, their attitude towards that particular transaction. So is the case with the dividend. Now, having understood a little about this finance, now all these decisions, and there is one more decision of late which has been added to this financing decision, is the working capital decision. I have not included it here purposefully, but that there are 4 decisions and all these 4 decisions have certain behavior. And that's why the finance plus behavior, that will be actually behavioral finance. Now, how you will be investing your money, in which instrument you will be investing your money, what will be the modus operandi of investing your money, or not only investing, financing your money, that depends to a large extent upon the learning of the person. A person who is not aware about the stock market, definitely howsoever money he is having or she is having, definitely that person will not be going to invest in the stock market. A person who is in a rural area, suppose a person who is in Punjab, and Punjab, like he might be driving a Mercedes car, but definitely there are every probability that that person will not be aware about the nitty-gritty of the stock market, and that's and in spite of having huge money at his disposal and agricultural income that is totally tax-free, there is a probability that he will not be going to invest his money in stock or stocks or bonds, and rather he will be happy to buy some tractors and buy some trucks or some extra piece of land for his agricultural purpose. Because why actually that person is behaving like that? And on the other hand, a person who is residing in Gujarat or Mumbai, and he is aware about all the detailed complicated transactions of the stock market, and there is every possibility that if that person is given money, he will be investing his money in some stocks or bonds and company shares. That difference in the behavior is because of the learning, because both the people have different set of learning. Another is the attitude. Just now I told you that there are some people who have very favorable attitude towards borrowed money, and there are some people who do not have very favorable attitude, or rather unfavorable attitude towards the borrowed money. Some people who have very unfavorable attitude towards investment in the stock market, howsoever profitable it is, and some people have not so unfavorable attitude towards investment in the stock market. And so is the case with the bank investment or bank fixed deposit or insurance or postal deposit or any other kind of investment. So that attitude of the person also governs what kind of behavior he will be or she will be demonstrating in his professional life and personal life. Then personality. What exactly is the personality? Personality is the sum total of how a person reacts to a given situation. Now, how a person reacts to a given situation, that defines personality, and this is also applicable in case of making decision with respect to that person's own finance. So that decides the personality of the person. And the perception, what kind of perception that person is having toward different instruments, to different activities, and the learning, attitude, personality and perception, all these things will decide the person's behavior with respect to managing his or her finances. And all these things are collectively called psychology. There are other elements also, but just for the sake of understanding, I have considered only these 3-4 aspects of psychology. So this is psychology. Not only this psychology, the social environment, as I told, I have given the example of a farmer in Punjab and a person residing in Gujarat. Why actually there is a difference in their behavior? It's because of the social environment. A person who is residing in Gujarat, his social environment or her social environment is that every day he or she is just meeting with the people who are either a stock market broker or investing in the stock market or talking about the stock market, and that makes a person familiar with the stock market. And on the other hand, a person who is residing in Punjab, there is every possibility that every second person he will be meeting will be talking about agriculture, the food crops, farm bill which is recently been introduced, passed by the government. Okay, and just go a little north to the Punjab, the people in the Pakistan, they will have some different kind of social environment. And a little further north to this Pakistan, in Afghanistan, you just see the people and you just start giving advice to the people in Afghanistan that you invest in the Reliance equity or this particular equity and it's very profitable. There is a probability that either you will be killed or you will be just kidnapped or you will be just thrown out of the system because of the situation, the prevailing situation in Afghanistan. So that the social environment that actually governs the behavior of the person, and including this financial behavior. Then the culture, what kind of culture it is. Just for example, from what kind of culture that person belongs to. There is a concept among the Muslims that there are certain things which are considered as haram activity in Islam, like the suwar, sood and sarab. So sood, that is interest. So the interest is considered to be haram. And similarly, tobacco or any alcoholic products, that are also considered to be haram. Haram means these are prohibited. And if you advise some person who is a very true believer in Islam that you invest in a company called State Bank of India and this is very profitable company, and the immediate response of that person will be that since this company, this State Bank of India or Axis Bank or ICICI Bank, these are actually dealing with interest, and since they are dealing with interest, and interest is considered to be a forbidden activity in Islam, and that's why there is every possibility that that investment will not be made in a banking company. Similarly, alcoholic products are also considered to be haram. So, and that's why if you just advise some person to invest in companies, say for example ITC or United Spirit, which is actually producing alcohol, howsoever profitable it is, but there is every possibility that this company will not be bought by the person who are actually believing in a certain philosophy that belongs to certain culture. So that culture also defines the behavior of the person with respect to the finance. Not only his general behavior, but financial behavior is also governed or dictated by the culture from which culture that person belongs to. And just to cater to the needs of this kind of people only, the government of India in the year 2010, actually they have started thinking from the year 2008 only that there has to be some way so that this vast population, which is almost 20% of the total population of India, that is the Muslim population, they are actually not included into the mainstream financial system, into the stock market, simply because of their faith, because they do not have trust that the company in which they are investing, whether this is Sharia compliant or this is non-Sharia compliant. Now Sharia is nowadays becoming a buzzword that if you just listen to some of the newspapers or read the newspapers or listen to some of the news channels, you'll find a Sharia. Everybody, some people are talking about Sharia. Many people are talking about Sharia. Now there is a huge population who do not actually been included into the mainstream financial system or stock market simply because of their faith. And that's why the 11th five-year plan, they had the mandate and they had the objective of having inclusive growth. So one way of having this inclusive growth was that how, and one challenge of this inclusive growth was how this 20% of the total population who are not investing in the stock market, they can be brought into the mainstream of the stock market. And that's why government of India have started Sharia index. Like you will just search in the internet BSE Sharia index. So BSE 500 or Nifty 500 Sharia index is also there. And what the Sharia index used to do? The Sharia index, they have identified a certain number of stocks and that has been indexed in that Sharia index. And it is a testimony to all those people who actually who belongs to a particular faith, that you invest in a company which is listed in this particular index, and you need not to worry about your faith. We have taken care of you. We have screened all those stocks which are actually 100% Sharia compliant. So the culture. Then social class. Class also have some impact on the behavior of the people. From which class that person belongs to. Okay, the class may be upper class, lower class, or SC, ST, general, OBC. Different classes are all, and these classes have an impact on our financial behavior. One example just I am giving, like one of my students was doing one project in Assam, and he was doing his project in Nagaland. And one interesting finding of his project that why people from the Nagaland are not so aware about the stock market, and why people from Nagaland are not very much taking interest, or they are not actually investing in the stock market. And one reason is that they do not have Demat account. Why they do not have Demat account? Simply one can open Demat account just visiting any of the terminals. I asked, and he said that, sir, because that for opening Demat account you require PAN card, and they do not have PAN card. So why they do not have PAN card? Because they belongs to the Schedule 6 of the Constitution of India. Some of the scheduled tribes in the Constitution of India have been included in Schedule 6, and by virtue of their being included in Schedule 6, they are exempted from income tax. And since they are exempted from income tax, they did not to pay any tax, and since they are not requiring to pay any tax, PAN card is not mandatory. So one kind of privilege which is given to them by the government, that they did not to pay tax, and that's why they are not getting their PAN card prepared. And because they do not have PAN card, in spite of that they want to explore this stock market, but they cannot open. They have to take one extra effort to open Demat account. They have to get their PAN card, and then Demat, which normally people they do not, because we are the people who always wants to maintain the status quo. So if बिना PAN card के काम चल रहा है तो ठीक है, कौन PAN card बनाने जाए. So this social class is also having an impact on the behavior of people, and with respect to our managing finances. And all these things will be studied in sociology. So psychology, then sociology, then history of a person, and the evolution what kind of evolutionary process we have gone through. That is the anthropology. So anthropology also have an impact on the decision people make with respect to their finance. Not only finance, other decisions also. So that anthropology have an impact. Our history, our evolution, our other like biological features, all these things are studied in anthropology. Then economic system. What kind of economic system we are having? Whether we are having this market economic system, market economy, or we have a command driven economy. We know that there are two types of economic system in the world. Two poles are there. That is market economy, which is popularly known as capitalism, which is led by USA, and there is another economic system that is called command economy, which was actually led by USSR at one point of time, but now it has gone certain changes, and which is popularly known as communism. Though we say that China is a communist country, but now China is one of the biggest attractor of FDI, and most of the private investments are actually coming in China. So actually, in one say that pure command economic system, it does not exist anywhere in the world, but theoretically it exists. So what kind of economic system you have? And in between market economy and command economy, we have adopted mixed economic system, that we will be having public sector as well as private sector, coexistence of both. And the type of investment we are making, the type of decisions we are taking, that depends to a large extent what kind of economic system we have. We are looking at the government for certain investment. We are making certain investment ourselves. This is because we have adopted mixed economic system. Had we adopted command economic system, that is a pure form of communism, then definitely we would have looked at the government for all kind of investment. Okay, one example I'm just giving, that we are having electricity, and that electricity in most of the states, electricity is provided by the government. So that is a public sector, government is providing us electricity, but at the same time we are having our own inverters and we have our own generators to generate electricity, or to provide backup whenever that failure, the government fails. So we have been made investment in that generator, or we have made investment in that inverter. That we are making investment in that inverter because we have certain economy, we have adopted economic system which is a mixed economic system. Similarly, we have police, that is the government provided. We have our own security guards, that is the private security personnel. We have made investment in that also. So what that economic system, it also defines what kind of investment, what kind of financing and dividend decision or working capital decision will be taking, that economic system also defines. Then economic status, what kind of economic status we have, whether we belongs to the developed country or developing country or some other underdeveloped country, or like there is another category of economic status, that Bhutan, they do not calculate their GDP, rather they calculate gross national happiness. So they have done away with the concept of GDP, gross domestic product, and they have focused completely on this gross national happiness. So what kind of economic status we have? In 1998, now everybody is talking about this world politics and this China and Afghanistan and Russia and America. In 1998, when India had tested its first nuclear bomb, that nuclear explosion was made, and USA have imposed certain sanctions on us. Then that Taliban crisis was there in 99 also. This IC-814 was hijacked, taken back to Kandahar, and India was in a very peculiar situation. And now everybody is everybody is taking, at that time nobody was taking India very seriously. But now India is entering into Pakistan, doing surgical strike, air strikes. Then India is also giving consultancy to Afghanistan. Why these things are happening? This is just because this is not India of 2021, is not of that of 1998. And it is just because of the economic status, economic development we had. In 1998, we have just little more than the $100 billion of foreign reserve, and now we have more than 600 billion, 6 times to that than that of 6 times 600 million, around 700 billion dollar of foreign reserve, and that economic status is giving us so much power that now the world have started taking us very seriously. So that is actually economics. Then we have our political system. What kind of political system we have adopted, whether it is a multi-party system or single-party system, then that of just like of China, or two-party system as that of this UK or USA, or say multi-party that we are having. What kind of political system, whether we should have a presidential form or this democratic form or parliamentary form of government, what kind of political system will be having. And don't think that is the kind of political system we used to have an impact only at the upper level, only at the top level of the country. The kind of political system we have an impact on our life, on our livelihood. We are governed by that political system. We becoming a part of that political system, and actually that political system used to dictate what kind of economic system we have. We have adopted the system of mixed economy because we have adopted a political system, and some person was there in the helm of affairs at that point of time in 1950 who have adopted a particular economic system. In 1950, when Jawaharlal Nehru and then followed by Lal Bahadur Shastri and then Indira Gandhi and Rajiv Gandhi, we were close to USA. Most of our economic policies were left driven. We were close to USSR, not USA, USSR. And now most of our economic policies are actually driven by market driven economy since 1991. Why? Because there was a change in the political system at the center, and that change have impacted our life. So that what kind of political system we have, what kind of accounting system we have, and what kind of accounting system we have, that also is actually governed by what kind of societal system we have. Okay, our sociology is actually defining what kind of accounting policy we should have. I'm just giving one example. I can just give a talk about this accounting system and sociology for hours and hours, but just one example I will be giving, that we used to charge depreciation most of the time primarily on the basis of written down value method of depreciation, and Americans used to charge depreciation based on straight line method. And if you just ask this question, why there is a change in the accounting policy with respect to depreciation in USA and India, you will find that it is because of the culture. What kind of culture? In USA, the moment you are buying some product, one car is being bought, at the time of buying that car, the expiry date is written that this car will have to be scrapped after 5 years or 10 years. And after 5 years, that car has to be thrown out in certain designated places. Okay, so if a car has been bought for $1 lakh, then and the life of that car is 10 years, then you know that after 10 years this car will have to be thrown out, it has to be scrapped at certain price, and that's why that straight line method depreciation has to be charged on that. But in India, we do not have the concept that even if the car is 20 years old, 30 years old, that car can still be driven, because we have taught to the world that the things can be repaired also. And the things can be repaired, and as the things can be repaired, it will not have a zero price at any point of time. And that's why in the written down value method, the car will not have zero value at any point of time, and it can be continued for substantially longer period, longer number of years, that particular car in the books of account, as well as it can be maintained, that car can physically maintained. So that and why? Because the US have the culture of eat, drink and throw away, use and throw, But we have the culture that that as I told you, that we have taught to the world that the things can be repaired also. So basically this is the returned on value method or straight line value method. This is primarily the difference of two cultures, and that is also being reflected in our accounting policies. So is the case with the valuation of stock valuation, that normally used to value based on the FIFO method, first in first out. Americans used to value last in first out region. That actually reflects their social values, social system. So that accounting also have an impact on our life. Then management, what kind of managerial style we'll be having, that have an impact. So all these things are having an impact on the kind of decision that we are making. Not only psychology, it's sociology, anthropology, economics, political science, accounting, management, everything have an impact on our decision we are making with respect to, today we are talking about this finance. So all these things have an impact on our finances, a decision impact on our finances, and all these things are collectively studied in the area called behavioral finance. Now let us revisit all these things. If we have to go for the financing decision, and suppose someone is belonging to a Muslim class, someone is a Muslim, a very true believer of Islam, then definitely he or she will not be going to borrow money because just in consideration of interest, because that interest is haram. That sociology is having an impact. So theoretically you may have some theory with respect to capital structure, you may have some theory related to the valuation of the company, but that sociology is having impact, anthropology is having an impact, economics is having an impact on the decision, whether it is a financing decision or investing decision or dividend decision. All these things are having an impact on the decision people are making, and all these things are studied collectively in behavioral finance. I hope this part is clear up to this. You are clear up to this? Now the next question is, having understood the backdrop of behavioral finance, now the question is it different from the traditional finance? The traditional finance, as we have studied, that what is finance? That identifying the, I'm just giving the very raw definition of finance, that identifying the different sources of finance, arranging finance at the best possible price, and making application of all those funds so that to enhance the value of the company. So that is the finance, that is the traditional finance. But behavioral finance, is it different from the traditional finance? Yes, it is different from the traditional finance. The question is how? In traditional finance, we normally used to assume that people process data appropriately and correctly. So we assume that whatever the data is there, people will process it very appropriately, people will process it correctly. We believe in the efficiency of the people, that and ability of the people to process data to the best of their ability. But in behavioral finance, we believe that people imply imperfect rules of thumb, that is the heuristics to process data, which includes biases in their belief and predisposes them to commit certain errors. Now we will discuss all these things in detail in later slides. So, but people employ imperfect rule of thumb, that is correct in behavioral finance. So, for example, since each one of you have studied little bit of finance, I'm just giving an example of current ratio. Suppose the current ratio of one company is 4:1. Rule of thumb says that it should be 2:1. Now, if the ratio is 4:1, what does it mean? So, some people will say, if you just analyze mechanically, that this is a very good liquidity position about the company, that 4:1, we require 2:1, but our current ratio is 3:1 or 4:1. So this is a very good sign so far as the liquidity of the company is concerned. But what is the other side of the story? Why you have so much of the current assets lying idle in your company? It means that you are not able to employ your current assets accurately and precisely and profitably, and that's why you have allowed all your current assets to be compiled up, and which actually have increased your current ratio. But this is a sign of inefficiency. People view all decisions through the transparent and objective lens of risk and return. But behavioral finance, it says that perception of risk and return are significantly influenced by how decision problems are framed. How a particular topic, how a particular problem is framed, that actually decides how people will process that decision. For example, there are two more very popular cars in India, one from Maruti and one from Hyundai. And you just see the tagline of those two cars, you will find, what is the tagline for Maruti? That kitna deti hai ki? And they are actually design their marketing strategy just keeping the mileage that company is giving at the core, that this is the car which is providing best mileage to their customers. And you know that if a mileage of the car has to be improved, then the surface area, the surface distance, the distance from the surface to the car has to be reduced. And if that surface distance has to be reduced, then the mileage of the car will be definitely better, relatively better than a car whose surface distance is relatively at a higher level. So that Maruti is positioning itself as the very fuel efficient car. And on the other hand, what is the tagline of Hyundai? That best suited for Indian conditions. Why? Because the surface area, surface distance of Hyundai is relatively at a higher level than that of Maruti. And because of that, the fuel efficiency of the cars from Hyundai is relatively little lesser than that of Maruti. And how these things are actually being positioned by Maruti and Hyundai, that Maruti is positioning itself as one of the very fuel efficient car. It is not showing that, it is not highlighting that its surface area is relatively lower, and that's why if the road conditions are not very good, then there are chances that many times the surface area, the surface of the car will be hit by the bad roads. But on the other hand, Hyundai is positioning itself as it is the it is best suited for the Indian conditions, given the bad road conditions of India are concerned. So that is most suitable car for the Indian conditions. So the same thing, both the cars are positioning in a two different way. And ultimately, some people are buying Maruti, some people are buying Hyundai. Both the cars are actually being sold. So how? Because जिसको जो चाहिए, some people require fuel efficient car, some people require some comfort, and then Tata is positioning itself as they are giving too much focus on the safety features. They are not giving focus on the fuel efficiency nor this surface distance, but their concern is safety of the passengers. So they are positioning themselves from that perspective. So how decision problems are framed, that depend how the perception things will be perceived by the people. Then people are guided by reason and logic and independent judgment. People are guided by that is the assumption of the traditional finance, that people are guided by logic. People are guided by sufficient reasons. But behavioral finance, we believe that we have our emotions, herd instincts that plays an important role in influencing decisions. Most of the decisions are actually taken by our emotions, and later on we imply logic, reason and justification to justify those decisions, which are actually primarily been taken by our emotions. Just one example, if I ask you, if I give you two equity shares, one by IOC and another of say Infosys Limited, and suppose you are sitting in Guwahati and these two shares are offered to you, that either you have to buy shares of Indian Oil Corporation or you can buy shares of Infosys. Now which share will be preferable to you? And there are chances that many of you will buy the shares of IOC. Why? Because of your geographical proximity. You are familiar with the IOC, that Nunmati refinery is nearby, then three refineries of IOC are in Assam, and that's why you will feel some emotional connect with IOC than that of Infosys, howsoever profitable it is, but you will have some emotional connect with the shares of Indian Oil Corporation, or so is the case with the Oil India Limited, whose head office is located in Duliajan, and that's why you may have the feel that this is our very own Assamese company. So you may have the emotion to own that company irrespective of its profitability. Then traditional finance, they assumes that markets are efficient and the market price of each security is an unbiased estimate of its intrinsic value. Efficient market, that is the hypothesis given by Eugene Fama in 1969-70, and for that Eugene Fama was awarded Nobel Prize of Economics in the year 2003 for his work on efficient market hypothesis. Now, what is this efficient market hypothesis? Efficient market hypothesis, it says that the market prices, they actually reflects all the correct info, they actually reflects all the publicly available information about that particular stock, and that particular price actually discounts all the information. So there cannot be any undervalued stock, or there cannot be any overvalued stock. So all the prices are correct. And if this is the case, my dear students, my dear friends, then you must agree that if all the prices are actually correctly valued, then why there is a fluctuation in the market? There is a fluctuation in the market because of the fact that I believe market prices not so efficient. You believe some other things about, you have some other information about the price, and that's why the prices are fluctuating. So the heuristic driven prices, errors, frame, dependence and efforts of emotions, social influence often lead to the discrepancy between the market price and the fundamental value. There is a very popular dialogue, one scene in movie दीवार, that विजय बाबू, ये सौदा तो हो ही गया, लेकिन आपको एक बात बताता चलो कि आपने इस बिल्डिंग के कुछ ज़्यादा दाम दे दिए। अगर आप मुझसे कहते तो मैं आपसे 1-2 लाख रुपए कम कर देता। आपको सौदा करना नहीं आता, तो सौदा तो आपको नहीं करना आता अग्रवाल साहब। अगर आप इस बिल्डिंग के 10-20 लाख रुपए भी ज़्यादा मांग लेते तो मैं दे देता। तो ऐसी क्या बात है इस बिल्डिंग में? ये जब बिल्डिंग बन रही थी तो मेरी माँ ने यहाँ ईंटें उठाई थी। सो वन वाज एक्चुअली valuing the building based on some information which he has, and other party was valuing the building based on certain information, certain emotions which he used to have with that building. Why this is not moving? Okay, then the question is, of course there is a difference between the behavioral finance and traditional finance. Then why the need for behavioral finance emerged? Why we all of a sudden we have started studying behavioral finance? We have seen there are crisis situation, especially the crisis of 2008, that is a great financial crisis. An interesting part of this crisis was that in spite of having so much of the research, so much of the theory we have with respect to finance, financial modeling, econometric modeling, none of the economists or the finance experts were able to predict that crisis. We had seen many bankruptcy cases. Lehman Brothers became bankrupt. Many banks in India become bankrupt. Stock market crash. And in spite of having all these theories, they fail to predict or provide solution. And why they provide solution? Because of their unrealistic assumption on which all these theories they are actually based upon. Why traditional finance failed? The reason is unrealistic assumption. And what is that unrealistic assumption? The first unrealistic assumption is that participants are rational. The market participants, the buyer, seller, all the participants, intermediaries, the first assumption in all those theories that you have studied, whether it is the market portfolio theory or arbitrage pricing model, capital asset pricing model, this marginal utility theory, whatever the theory that you have studied in your UG and PG level, you will find one assumption that participants are rational. And who is a rational? What is rationality? That everybody will be trying to maximize their utility at a given level of cost or minimize their cost at a given level of benefit. That is rationality, which actually does not happen. If the participants would have been rational, there would not be so much fluctuation in the stock market, because everybody will be trying for the same security, same asset. Suppose if I believe that a particular security, say just I'm naming one company, don't think that this is I'm commenting about anything about that company. Suppose I believe that Tata Steel is a good company to buy, so definitely I will be buying Tata Steel. But the person who will be holding that security, Tata Steel, he will also think, or she will also think, that Tata Steel is a good security to buy, a good security, and that's why that person will not sell Tata Steel. So that person, knowing that this is a good security, that person will not sell. And I know that Tata Steel is a good security, I want to buy, but I will not getting any seller for that particular security, and that's why there will be very little trading in the stock market if had the market participants would have been rational. The question is, are we irrational? Are we irrational? We have seen that since last year we have been following this campaign, boycott Chinese product. Rationality says that if a product is available at a cheaper cost, then we should maximize our benefit. If a product X is available at 100 rupees and the same product is offered by one Chinese company at 50 rupees, then rationality says that we should buy a product which is available at 50 rupees and we should maximize our benefit. So by boycotting Chinese product, or by becoming Atmanirbhar, or by promoting our own brands, vocal for local, are we becoming irrational? Definitely nobody would like to be called as irrational. Similarly, we have seen that in market there are many players who are actually behaving in a way which is beyond the understanding of rationality, or beyond the understanding of rational behavior. Does it mean that all the market participants are irrational? The example I have given just now, that whether you would like to invest in a company called, say, Indian Oil Corporation Limited, or you will like to buy a shares of Wipro, and if you say that you would like to buy shares of IOC or Oil India Limited, does it mean that you people are irrational? No, it does not mean that you are irrational. Rather, your rationality is biased. And that's why a new terminology is coming up, that is the biased rationality. And if you just study the behavioral finance literature, a lot of researches are being going on in the area called bounded rationality. Your rationality is bounded by certain things. There are certain limitations to your rationality, and within that only you will be showing your rationality. So
question, sir.
Just let me complete after that.
Okay, sir.
Keep your questions for the at the end.
Yes, sir.
So we are rational, so definitely we have certain our rationality is biased. This is a picture which actually defines how rational we are. This particular person is saying this truth, but unpleasant truth and comforting lies, and definitely there is a queue before a person who is selling product based on the comforting lies. So it itself is a testimony of the fact that we are not rational. Then stock price reaction to non-information, that some examples I have collected. Crash of 1987, 22.6% decline without any apparent news. In 1987 there was a big stock market crash and 22% decline was there, but there was no apparent news on that particular day. Then 50 largest one-day stock price movements, they occurred on days of no major announcement. Nothing had happened on a particular day, but that the stock market movement had happened. Inclusion of a stock in S&P 500 index results in significant share price reaction. If a stock is included in S&P 500 index, or they are included in Sensex, or they are included in S&P 200 or 100 or Carbonex, then that actually results into a significant price rise, though it has nothing to do with the profitability of the company, the working condition of the company. Simply stock is included in certain index. So how does it going to affect the working of the company? Company is not going to be affected in any way, but simply stock is included in certain index. There will be price rise of that particular stock. So that is actually that is beyond the understanding of rationality. Assumption 2, that investors, instead of investor just replace it with that the market participants, they take care of all the available options. Okay, they take care of all the available options, or they take care of, they study all the available informations. That would have been the better line, that market participants, they study or they take care of all the available information related to that particular decision. Let me give one example. Like a boy, he wants to marry, and if he wants to marry, then all the girls on the earth in a particular age group are the options. Or just make the things reverse. A girl wants to marry, and all the boys on the earth in a particular age group are the options. Now the total population of the earth is somewhere around 700 crore, and if a boy wants to marry, and in a particular age group, say 20 to 35, if he is searching for a girl in an age group of 20 to 35, there may be some 100 crores of the girls within that age, that category. And if he used to take care of, if he used to have examine or to meet all the girls available in this on this earth, then ultimately the result may be that he may not marry by the end of his life. And that's why the investors, so is the case with the investors. We believe that investors, they take care of all the available options, but this is not the case. In Bombay Stock Exchange, there are around 8,000 number of securities. In National Stock Exchange, there are around 1,800 number of securities. And before investing in any security, the investor, he do not scan all the securities available listed in that stock exchange. Rather, he or she used to scan only a limited number of securities. Okay, and based on that particular scanning, say 3, 4, 5 number of security, and one will be picking, okay, this particular security is a good security to invest in, that decision will be made. So that assumption 2, it also does not hold good. Like we used to do, everyone carefully examines the information that this actually, like before installing any software in your computer, just we used to click the next button, yes I accept, and next, without understanding, without reading the things which are given. Similarly, if you have to sign some investment document or insurance related documents, people will sign their investment related documents without giving us 1 second to that. They will just put their signature wherever their agents have marked. Okay, just put your signature. They simply just put their signature without actually examining or without even reading. Forget about examination, without even reading the document. So, meaning thereby people, they do not carefully examine all the information related to their investment. The second slide is that is Sanjog Ajuba. This is a WhatsApp forward many of you have received, and many of you have just forwarded. This forward I have received in the year 2018. I have just saved the screenshot of it just to tell people that how irrational people are, and how people, they do not take care of all the information that, and it does not require any rocket science to verify all this information, that 1/1/2018 is Sunday, 2/2/2018 is Sunday. Just have to consult the calendar which is there in your room. Just see it, whether it is true or not. But without examining, we are just forwarding it. It means that we do not take care of all the information. Another assumption of traditional finance is that a perfect market. And what is perfect market? That is the large number of buyers and sellers, homogeneous product, free entry and exit, perfect knowledge of prices and technology, no transportation cost, no artificial restrictions. All these conditions has to be fulfilled, and then there will be perfect. And if you just see the theories, whether it is the theory of that is the dividend theory, or Walter model, or Modigliani Miller model, or arbitrage pricing theory, capital asset pricing model, any theory, Markowitz portfolio theory, the one assumption is that the market has to be perfect, and that perfect market, it rarely exists. Remember, I am using the term rarely. Why I'm not using the term it does not exist. It rarely exists means it exists in case of agriculture to some extent. Like in agriculture, a large number of buyers and sellers, the product will be homogeneous. There is no entry and exit restrictions in case of agriculture. Perfect knowledge of price and technology there. There is no transportation cost to some extent, because agricultural products are most of the time they are sold near the place of production. So there is no transportation cost at the point of selling, so far as the selling is concerned. Once the things are sold, then after that some transportation cost will be there, but after that it will no longer be an agricultural product. No artificial restrictions are there. So perfect market, it also does not exist. It rarely exists in reality. So that condition is also no longer applicable. Resources are allocated efficiently. This is also not a valid assumption, and that's why we have seen that all these traditional finance theories, whether it is efficient market hypothesis, modern portfolio theory, asset pricing model, CAPM, expected utility theory, dividend theories are there, valuation theories are there, many other theories are there. All these theories are based on all these assumptions, which assumption it actually does not exist in reality. And that's why there is a need to study something through which we can predict the behavior of the people, the market participants, and here lies the solution lies in the area of behavioral finance. Now we have talked about rationality and irrationality. Now based on the rationality of the person and the rational behavior, the four decision situations are there. Like rational man making rational decision. And when I'm using the term man, ladies, please forgive me. Actually, I should have written rational person but actually this is my mistake. So rational person making rational decision, rational person making irrational decision, irrational person making rational decision, and irrational person making irrational decision. These are the four decision situations. These quadrants are there. And in traditional finance, we actually study only one decision situation, that is the rational man making rational decision. And all other decision situations, that rational man making irrational decision, irrational person making irrational decision, and irrational person making rational decision, or maybe the rational decision rationality we can replace it with the biased rationality. All these four, 3/4 of the decision situations are actually not being considered in the traditional finance. That is actually huge. That's a huge number. That we are actually focusing only on the 25% of the situation, and that too based on some unrealistic assumptions. And that's why the traditional finance fails in providing solution to the questions imposed by the situation from time to time. And that's why here the solution lies in the area called behavioral finance. In the behavioral finance, there are certain models of human being. So traditional finance, it assumes rational human being, that is the traditional finance. But after that, emotional human being is actually the model of human being that was assumed in the early development in the behavioral finance, that human being will not be rational, rather either the person will be irrational or having some emotional content. And then from emotional human being to the biased rationality, that is the later development in the behavioral finance, and the normal human being. Now of late, the behavioral finance theorists, the behavioral finance experts, they have started assuming that human being is not a rational being, not irrational being, not emotional being, rather is a normal human being, and he will have all the normal traits which a normal human being used to have. That is the model of human being as assumed by the behavioral finance over a period of time. And now here comes the definition. After having understood the background of behavioral finance, the definition is that the premise of behavioral finance states that by considering psychological factors into account, the effectiveness of the investment strategies can be enhanced. And it is that branch of study that uses psychology-based theories to explain market anomalies. And this is that diagram once again I have just given. Now, what is history of behavioral finance study? And if we have to study the history of behavioral finance, we have to go back with Adam Smith, because we know that finance or management or commerce, our parent discipline is economics. And Adam Smith, he is known as the father of economics and one of the classical economists. And during the classical period, economics used to had a very close link with psychology. Okay. In the year 1776, when Adam Smith had published a book called An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of Wealth of Nations. So with this, the development of economics had started in West in 1776. So if you read Adam Smith, we'll find that during this classical period, economics and psychology were having a very close association. Most of the theories, most of the writings of Adam Smith, and not only Adam Smith, this famous classical economist like David Ricardo or Thomas Robert Malthus, John Stuart Mill, all these classical economists, whatever the theories they have given, it was not independent of psychology and sociology. There was a very close knit of psychology and sociology in the theories that they have proposed, this classical economist. Like for example, John Stuart Mill, he says that system of logic is concerned with the right method of thinking for constructing a science of human nature that would include psychology, sociology, and economics. So economics was not independent of psychology and sociology, but it was during this neoclassical period that economists, they started to begin to distance themselves from psychology, and this was primarily because they sought to reshape this discipline as a natural science or as an independent science. Because they want to position this discipline, they might have the thought of the positioning of this discipline as an independent discipline. So this neoclassical theory, the assumption of this rational agent or the rationality, actually that emerged during this neoclassical period. And some of the economists during this period was Alfred Marshall, John Clark, Irving Fisher, Wilfred Pareto. They were some of the classical economists, and they have started giving their theories, developing theories on the assumption of rationality of the agent, perfect rationality of the market participants, which have led to distancing of the economics from psychology. So these are some of the neoclassical model, this Miller model, Markowitz theory, Sharpe model, and Black-Scholes modeling, option pricing is there. So all these are some neoclassical finance model are there, and all these theories are actually independent. There is no role of emotions and psychology and sociology in this model. They are independent, and that's why they are not actually able to correctly predict the happening in the market, or not only market, in the economics, in the economy. But modern economists, what was there? That psychology has largely disappeared from the economic discussion. Okay, expected utility and discounted utility models begin to gain wide acceptability. Models based on rationality of participants start gaining. Model based on rationality of participants. Okay, these are some of the modern economists. What was India doing at that time? As we have seen that Adam Smith, the father of economics, and he has started his journey from 1776. So in the West, the economics, the discussion related to economics started in the year 1776 by the Adam Smith. And what was India doing that period? So we have people called Chanakya, and Chanakya have written this Arthashastra, economics, its Hindi meaning is Arthashastra, in the year 320 BC, that is 2300 years back, almost 2350 years back. Chanakya, or this his another name was Kautilya, has written a book called Arthashastra, that is called, it means the economics. And what was there in the economics? If you just read this Arthashastra, it is very close knit of political science, public administration and economics. It means economics and political science and public administration were not independent of each other. Very many places Chanakya highlighted what is the dharma of Raja, and when he is saying the term what is the dharma of Raja, that is actually he is trying to hit on many the theories of political science from the perspective of economics, and economics is not independent of political science or public administration. So there is a very well knit of political science, public administration, economics, as well as when political sciences, there definitely psychology and sociology will be there. So that is very well mingled during the period of Chanakya. And after that, India used to have many such economists. We'll talk sometime later on about all those economics. And Indian philosophy, we have understood there are four objectives of human being: that dharma, artha, kama and moksha. And this artha is not independent activity. It has to be with the dharma and kama. And this artha, that means the economics, has to be attained by living in the grihasthashram. And when you are residing in grihasthashram, it has to be knitted with the dharma and it has to be with the kama. So dharma, artha and kama, moksha, actually it can be considered as one of the independent activity, but not 100%, because that is also simultaneous with other activities. And dharma, it does not mean that it's a religion. Dharma means one way of uttering the word dharma is duty, another is charity, one way of dharma is worship and self-actualization. All these are the different concepts of dharma, and dharma, artha and kama, it has to be together. It's not that artha will be independent in isolation of other activities. It means that artha, that is the finance, has to be managed by residing in the grihasthashrama, which will have all the sociological, psychological and political impact. So decision by discipline, and ultimately we know that economics, political science and psychology, economics have given birth to commerce and economics and management, and from commerce, economics, we have another system called behavioral finance or other economics we are having. Then the mixing of psychology with economics, it was the recent example, it is found with Daniel Kahneman, who have got Nobel Prize of Economics in the year 2002 for his work on prospect theory. And this person, he is not an economist, and the Nobel Prize of Economics was given to a person from psychology for his work on prospect theory. Another person is Richard Thaler, who was awarded Nobel Prize of Economics in the year 2007 for his work on nudge theory. And Nobel Prize of 2017 was given to Richard Thaler for his work in behavioral economics, especially nudge theory. He has been awarded. So having understood all these things about behavioral finance, now what the critic says? Critic says that behavioral finance is just a collection of anomalies. Definitely there will be anomalies, because anomalies are there because our traditional finance, they are not able to provide answer to some of the problems, some of the questions raised by the contemporary situations, and that's why these anomalies are there, and behavioral finance is trying to address the concern, address the questions posed by all these anomalies. Inapplicable to the market situation, even traditional finance theories are not able to predict the market, so we should not only blame behavioral finance, but at least behavioral finance is trying to find solution to some of the questions which the traditional finance are not able to answer. And limitations of experimental and survey based technique. Many people, they criticize behavioral finance because they say that behavioral finance is just an experimental, it is a collection of experimental technique, or it is based on survey based technique. But every discipline have some methodology. Like if someone is doing research in geology, then for geology there is some kind of methodology, accepted methodology. For physics, some different methodology has to be adopted for chemistry, some other methodology has to be adopted. In behavioral finance, it is experimental and survey based technique, and moreover, this is a very evolving field. So this is evolving field, so of late there are some other methodologies are evolving, some more will be added. Definitely over a period of time it will become rich and it will become more flourish, more prosperous. Then weak empirical evidence. Again, the reason is it's a new field, and we are comparing this behavioral finance with traditional finance. It means that we are comparing a small child with a full-grown person. So a small child cannot be compared with a full-grown person, grown-up person. It will need time to grow, and once it is given some time, then definitely at that time we can discuss about what will be the future of behavioral finance. And too much emphasis on individual irrationality, but just now I have said that it is actually not irrationality but our biased rationality. More weightage on attitude. Definitely we have seen the one movie called Risk Hai To Ishq Hai Scam 1992, and if you just see in the life of that Harshad Mehta, it is all about his attitude, his gut feeling, his intuition towards the stock market, because it was the same stock market which he could visualize from a different perspective, and he was able to make money. But though it was, I'm not saying that whatever he did was correct, but definitely you have to salute the brain of that person, that it was the same stock market, he has seen it from a different perspective, and actually he was able to make money. And actually this is the attitude of that person. In favor of behavioral finance, there is absence of behavioral CPM, which is of late developed by Eugene Fama. Then validity of efficient market hypothesis and investor rationality is questionable. That is true. And since efficient market hypothesis and investor rationality does not exist, and hence behavioral finance will have a very great future. Investors make systematic mental mistakes, and just to study their mental mistakes, we have studied this behavioral finance. And there are certain theories in behavioral finance, though there are no specific theories from other disciplines, psychology, anthropology, economics, we have borrowed, and we have just translated it in the context of behavioral finance. Some of the theories like prospect theory, regret theory, nudge theory, anchoring, disposition, mental accounting, overreaction, overconfidence, all these theories are there. So if you want, I can just give a separate lecture, or one full lecture on each of the theories can be given. So these are some of the theories related to behavioral finance. I hope this is sufficient just to raise the curtain that is there on the subject behavioral finance. And the theme of the seminar or the webinar, that is curtain raiser, I am able to raise the curtain to some extent. Now the participants will let me know whether I am able to successful in doing that or not. Thank you very much for your patient listening.